Lots of people are buying the Malaysian ringgit as it falls to a new low against the Singdollar. Who is at risk of long COVID and is it common here in Singapore? We speak to a doctor to find out. YouTuber Dkosh begins his jail sentence today for sexual offences involving teenage boys. Hello, you're watching The Big Story with me, Chiao Su Ann. Subscribe to the Straits Times channel to stay up to date with our live news updates. The weekend is almost here and many are ringing in the National Day holiday with a wallet full of ringgit. Crowds are queuing up to change money, with the Malaysian currency hitting an all-time low against the Singapore dollar. Many customers we spoke to are buying ringgit before heading up to Malaysia for the long weekend, while some simply wanted to take advantage of the strong exchange rate, with one customer changing $30,000 for over 100,000 ringgit. While the strong exchange rate has caused a surge in demand for ringgit, money changers tell us that business is still at a fraction of pre-pandemic levels.
Business after the COVID, they think the business pick up only about 30-40% so far until now. What we really money changers are waiting for is the opening of the China market. China, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. These are the main market. So we expecting our Chinese tourists come to Singapore. They are the one who bring bulk of foreign currencies and they change over here to euro and US dollars and they go for holidays. This weekend, yes, compared to last month, this weekend is a bit more transaction. And the thing is, Malaysian hit about 320, so a lot of people are buying it for the National Day holidays. Not much of currency selling, only Thailand, but Indonesian and Malaysian, doing only the regional.
Today actually we happen to have plans to go to JB because we took a half day off from work and then tomorrow is a weekend, and it's actually been our first time to go to JB since I think since before COVID. Yeah, and then I happened to see the news this morning also, the rate was quite good, so a good time for us to go.
I guess today's rate is slightly higher, it's at 3.2. It used to be like 3.18. And I guess I take this opportunity to just change, and because the coming holiday, we are going for a short holiday up north.
Because it's going to be the long weekend this week, so actually we'll be going to Malaysia for holiday. So I changed about $300 Sing, which I got about 960 ringgit, which is pretty good. So sometimes if the rate is good, I'll just change more and keep. Yeah.
Some travellers, though, may find themselves facing delays and disruptions. Singapore Airlines cancelling 2 flights for today due to airspace restrictions as China conducts military exercises around Taiwan. The flights affected are SQ878 from Singapore to Taipei and SQ879 from Taipei to Singapore. Scoot also cancelled flights to and from Taipei today. Persistent chest pain, breathing difficulties and fatigue even months after recovering from COVID-19. With long COVID, some continue to suffer. And while there is not a diagnostic test or treatment specifically for long COVID, there is some medication for symptom relief. Some good news though, vaccinated persons in Singapore who had COVID-19 over this recent Omicron wave or the one earlier in the year are much less likely to develop long COVID symptoms. Joining us now to tell us more is Dr. Barnaby Young, head of the Singapore Infectious Disease Clinical Research Network at the National Centre for Infectious Diseases. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Young. So what are the most common types or symptoms of long COVID? And when we say long, how long do we mean? How severe are these symptoms?
The symptoms from long COVID are very variable. So lots of people report different symptoms. Probably the most common is breathlessness, brain fog, tiredness, cough, and what we call post-exertional malaise, which is feeling very tired after sometimes just minimal activity. The definition for long COVID is variable as well in terms of how long symptoms need to continue for before we consider this long COVID. It's interesting as well, I suppose, if we compare COVID to a typical cold we might expect symptoms to just last for 24, 48 hours, and COVID symptoms usually last for longer than that. For influenza, so seasonal influenza, symptoms usually last for, say, 3 to 7 days. But even beyond that, people may still have a cough or have post-viral fatigue, so feel tired afterwards. And COVID is more similar to that. So the symptoms of acute infection may last for up to a week, sometimes for another week or two afterwards. Some symptoms we consider still part of that acute infection. And it's once we get beyond about 4 weeks that we start to think of this as long COVID. And certainly once we get beyond 3 months after the acute infection, we would call this long COVID syndrome. In terms of the severity of symptoms, fortunately for most people, they are relatively mild. So they may be very disruptive to their life and being able to get on with work and with their day-to-day activities. But they do recover over those first 3 months. And it's really the minority, a very few who experience more severe symptoms, which are really disabling or which go beyond those 3 months.
So, Doctor, during this period, do they still test positive or not?
No. So the infection is cleared. At least the ART test will be negative. Those will clear, usually within 7 days or so. A PCR can be positive, but that's not associated with long COVID. So the PCR test can be positive for some weeks after an infection because it's just picking up little viral fragments, and they are not thought to be related to long COVID.
So you've also mentioned that vaccinated persons in Singapore who had COVID-19 over this recent Omicron wave or the one earlier in the year are much less likely to develop long COVID symptoms. Any particular reason why? And on the flip side, who then is more likely to develop long COVID?
So vaccination is very good at protecting against long COVID. So we think that reduces the incidence of long COVID by about 50%. And Omicron itself reduces the incidence of long COVID by a similar amount as well. So for people who have had COVID, and there's a lot of people in Singapore and around the world who have had COVID in the past 6 months, the chances that they will develop long COVID is much lower compared with earlier in the pandemic, and particularly before vaccines were available in 2020. And the reason why long COVID develops is something to do with a disordered immune response to the virus. So we don't know exactly what that is and what the driver or trigger that is, or even really which part of the immune system is being affected. But somehow within long COVID, the immune response is disordered, and that results in these persistent symptoms. And there's still needs to be research really, and still studies ongoing to find out who may be most at risk. Taking apart vaccination, which is being vaccinated is the best protector we have from not getting long COVID.
So what are Singapore's latest long COVID statistics? A Dutch study in the Lancet Medical Journal suggests that about 1 in 8 adults with COVID-19 may experience long COVID. Is that the same in Singapore right now? And how do we compare with the rest of the world?
That is similar from early in the pandemic. So that study in the Lancet was conducted before vaccines were available. So the study that we had done earlier in the pandemic suggested that somewhere around 10% of people still experience some symptoms from COVID more than 3 months after their initial infection. I don't have data for you, unfortunately, in terms of what proportion that is of people develop long COVID in Singapore now with Omicron and vaccination. There is studies which are ongoing, which are looking into that in Singapore. But data internationally and our observations from here as well is that long COVID is much less common, both because of vaccination and because of Omicron being a milder infection, so a variant which is less likely to trigger so much systemic inflammation.
Definitely comforting to know that long COVID is less common. That was Dr. Barnaby Young, NCID. In other news, Singapore YouTuber Daryl Ian Koshi, better known as Dkosh, has been jailed for 32 weeks, and he will begin serving his sentence from today. He pleaded guilty in May to various sexual offences, including the attempted sexual exploitation of a young person and offering cash for sexual favours to victims under 18 years old. A 25-year-old driver has been arrested for drink driving and careless driving after 2 men died in a lorry accident. It happened on Thursday morning at Old Jurong Road towards Upper Bukit Timah Road. 2 men were pronounced dead at the scene, while the driver and remaining 5 passengers were taken to hospital. Video of the incident was posted by Singapore Roads Accident on Facebook. 24 prisoners on death row who sued the Attorney General alleging that they had been deprived of their right to counsel had their case thrown out by the Court of Appeal this morning. One of the inmates is Abdul Rahim Shafi'i, who is scheduled to be hung today. And in international news, U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the United States will not allow China to isolate Taiwan after her visit to the island this week angered Beijing. She's in Japan on the final leg of her Asian tour, meeting today with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who called for the immediate cancellation of China's ongoing military drills in the waters around Taiwan. And those are our top stories. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Chao Suan, and have a great weekend.